I'd now like to welcome Bruno Roche and Professor Colin back to the stage to introduce to you the economics of mutuality.
We've heard a lot just now about how our capitalism is broken and we've got to revise the system. Let me just put this in perspective. The current view about capitalism is that capitalism is an economic system of private ownership of the means of production and its operation for profit. And ownership is a bundle of rights over assets that confer strong forms of authority on those who possess them. And firms in this context are nexuses of contracts overseen by boards of directors for the benefit of their owners. Now that's a coherent, consistent notion of capitalism, that it's private ownership for profit with strong forms of control of the rest of us through contracts. But there's a parallel view about capitalism, which says that capitalism is an economic and social system for producing profitable solutions to the problems of people and planet by private and public owners who do not profit from producing problems for people or planet. And in this context, ownership is not just a bundle of rights, but a set of obligations to uphold those purposes and ensure that they're delivered. And firms in this context are not just nexuses of contracts, but nexuses of relations of trust based on principles and values upheld by the boards of companies. Now that too is a coherent, consistent notion of capitalism which says it's about solving problems by owners and directors who are committed to solving those problems and engaging the rest of us, not just through contracts, but also through relations of trust. And what is going to change the nature of our capitalism system is the fact that business has fundamentally changed. 50 years ago, 85% of the S&P 500 companies' assets were tangible assets, buildings, plants, and machinery. Today, 88% of those S&P 500 assets are intangible assets, brands, and reputation. And in particular, human assets, employees and intellectual capital, social capital, and natural assets. And in particular, companies that previously were deemed to have property rights conferred on their owners because the owners purchased the physical assets of the company are no longer owners of those other assets, human assets, social assets, and natural assets. They don't own their employees. They don't own their societies. They don't own their nature and their environment. But they are increasingly dependent on them, and they increasingly impact on them. Just think of Google or Facebook. It's not just that they are dependent on the societies in which they operate, they impact on those societies, and they do so not just within particular nation states, they do so globally. And just think about the extent to which companies are increasingly dependent on their environment and impacting on their environment. And that turns our notion of the property rights of capitalism on its head and says that it's about obligations and duties to uphold those other parties, the human assets, the social assets, and the natural assets. And that's what the economics of mutuality is about. It's about investing in those assets so that you create the capability and the capacity of those assets to be able to deliver what they are capable of doing. And that's a key element in terms of what the economics of mutuality is seeking to do, in terms of realizing people's capacity to be able to deliver as individuals, the capacity of societies to be able to enhance the world that we're living in and to enhance the ability of business to deliver, and to enhance our nature and environment in such a way that our nature and environment can support still greater economic activity going forward. And thinking in those terms, one recognizes this is not just about the success of business, it's about the success of our economies, our macroeconomies. Because what in the process of doing this, one is essentially creating the ability of people to realize their notional supplies and make them into effective supplies. That's what people talked about in terms of the Keynesian revolution 60, 70 years ago, when they talked about the inability of people to express their demands because they didn't have the money and the wealth to do that. What we're now entering into is a world in which it's not about creating effective demand, it's about creating effective supply, the ability of individuals to be able to realize their potential through fulfilling meaningful work, through the potential of societies to be able to deliver what we need, through the ability of nature and the environment to go on being able to do that. And the remarkable feature of those assets, of human assets, social assets, and natural assets is their distinctive nature, their perpetual nature. Information and knowledge has the distinguishing feature that we can consume as much of it as we want, and it doesn't diminish, it doesn't depreciate. We can have trust in society, and we can base things on trust as much as we like. And we can expand our activities on that trust, and it doesn't depreciate. And natural capital is the only asset that regenerates itself. We don't have to expand on it, provided that we don't misuse information, we don't provide misinformation, we don't abuse trust and result in a decline and mistrust. And if we don't overconsume our natural assets, they will go on regenerating themselves. These are assets that are there in perpetuity, provided that we know how to use them, invest in them, and maintain them. And a key element to that is a recognition that our current capitalist system, by putting all of the control in the hands of finance, is giving us the wrong governance system. It's the answer to the question that was posed near the beginning as to how do we reconcile this with a system in which people want to have returns on their capital. Of course they want to have returns on their capital. Finance is critically important, but it should not be the controlling asset. That is the fundamental problem of our current system. We have linked finance with governance and control. And we need to recognize that we have to separate those in terms of emphasizing the significance of human assets, social assets, and natural assets. And let me just end by illustrating that in relation to one particular corporation. It's this corporation. It's Oxford University. Oxford University is one of the oldest corporations in the world, dating back to the 13th century. And the reason why it dates back to the 13th century is that it is providing information knowledge through education. It's providing trust in the production of knowledge through research and scholarship. And it's providing an exceptional environment, an environment of beautiful buildings on the principle that architecture inspires. And the reason it's been able to do that for 900 years is it is not governed by finance. It raises finance from donors, from the government. But just think of what would have happened to this institution if it had been controlled by the donors or by the government. It would not have survived to today. And recognizing that importance of the governance and the separation of governance and finance is critical to our economic system going forward. Because ultimately, trust is one of the most important and yet unrecognized assets of business and society in general. Trusted corporations are commercially successful corporations, and the competitiveness of our nations depends on the trustworthiness of our businesses. For the sake of the many, not just the few, for the future as well as the present. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. I have actually the difficult task just to speak before the break, so please bear with me for another 10 minutes, not more, I promise. The economics of mutuality. I'd like to start with a quote, which actually was a very old quote, that there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. And actually, wise leadership is about to discern the time and season. And we are at this time where really things are shifting, not only at the micro level in business, but also at the macro level. When we had this conversation about 9 months ago with Colin, we talked about the consequences of the economic stability thinking on the macroeconomics. This idea of completing the Keynesian journey was absolutely fantastic idea. The shift from a demand-driven economy to a supply-driven economy. And this is massive. It's going to change the way the world will be organized. And it's all about understanding, actually, these macro changes, but also to be faithful in little things, which actually when you start with your business, right? And this is the purpose of the economics of mutuality. Very humbly, we started 12 years ago with a few people in a boardroom. I remember Martin Radban was there. And we had this question, an amazing question, what should be the right level of profits? And of course, this question was asked by a shareholder, so therefore it has a strong business idea behind it. It was not charity, it was not just giving back or giving away, it was, wow, is there something actually that actually is fair in order to ensure that my business will continue to prosper? We took this question very, very seriously. And to our big surprise, this actually has not been studied in business or economics. And as you know, over the last 50 years, the only response we had is that's as much as you can, right? But the context is fundamentally changing. And, you know, we have, since the 2008 crisis, we had hundreds of books, of conferences, talks, forums, initiatives, all very, very, very inspiring. And actually, this is a sign that, as you said, Shelby, this Homo conference, whatever, is actually that there is a craving in people's mind to look for something actually is more than just making money the old way. But despite all of these great initiatives, it is still the old order that remains. It is still the people and the environment that is in service of the economy, and the economy that is in service of finance, and finance is still in service of itself. So this hasn't changed. And you can ask why? Why, after so much energy, focus. Essentially, we are still in this old order. I think we have to look backward and we have to look forward. Backward, over the last 50 years, in my view, two things happened. The first one is that we had a change, radical change in the scarcities in the world. 50 years ago, financial capital was scarce, right? But natural capital was overly abundant, right? So at that time, as economics is nothing more or nothing less than the management of scarcities, it makes perfect sense to have a financial capitalistic system because it was all about addressing scarcities that existed at that time. Today, 50 years later, financial capital is overly abundant to the extent we have negative interest rates in some countries, but other forms of capital have become scarce, and yet we are still operating on a model that creates in excess something which already in excess in the system without addressing the scarcity in the system. So you don't need to be an ideologist or you don't need to have a PhD in economics to understand that something is wrong. So fundamentally, the shift has to focus on new scarcities. And new scarcities are no longer money. It's no longer about stimulating the demand. It's about organizing the aggregate level of supply. And the good news is that there is a lot of resources in the supply, a lot of waste also. And if we collectively apply the discipline and the rigor of management that we applied over the last 50 years on financial capital to other forms of capital supply side, the opportunity for growth are almost unlimited. And this is the second point I'd like to make, is that over the same period of time, companies, especially multinational companies, which have been the great benefit, which have benefited a lot from the financial capitalist system, have become actually the main actors, the major players of globalization. Today, many companies, including companies like ours, can rival with nation states. The issue is that with this growth and influence, leaders of business, which actually are trained in business schools, are ill-equipped to handle the complexities that their new size and new influence confer on them. But yet, it is my argument that the shift will happen at the level of business. So we're talking about economic model, of course, that completing the Keynesian journey, but I'd like to bring the idea of a business model, management model, at the microeconomic level. So what did it mean for a business like Mars, for a business like yours, to bring this change about? Moving forward, and Colin alluded to that, there is also two forces which actually will put pressure, but also will relax constraints on the economic system. The first one is that the new economy, what we call the digital economy or knowledge economy, is actually not really financial capital intensive. You don't need a lot of money to create a startup. You don't need a lot of money to create an application. And this knowledge economy, which is essentially based on relationship of people, which is social capital, and the quality and the skills of people, which is human capital, actually is not really financial capital intensive, unlike the previous system where you need a lot of money to build brands, to build manufacturing units, to build banks. So actually the drift away from financial capital will be accelerated by this shift to the knowledge economy. The last point that actually we are also the demography. People matters, right? And demography has actually, the population of the world doubled over the last 50 years. It will continue to grow. And we have rising middle class that actually is going to put pressure on the access of natural resources. So this is the environment in which we operate. So how can we eventually make sense of this? So I'd like now to introduce the second phase of this conference, which essentially we've organized the conference in 5 skill shops. And these 5 skill shops correspond to the methodology that we have designed to implement, to put in practice the economics of mutuality in a business context. The first one is to start with the idea that purpose is not something you just describe or you put on the walls of your company just to describe what you're doing, you describe your values. Purpose, as you said, Maureen, drives strategy. So you could argue that the generic purpose is what Colin said, is that the purpose of business is to create profitable solutions for people and planet problems. This actually is a very generic purpose statement that every single company can take and make it real in its own environment. And this actually is opening real new opportunities, and we'll come to that during the workshop. The second one is to realize that actually that any business is actually not working in isolation of the others. Actually, you can't be mutual on your own, right? You need others. But the important thing is that it's important to understand the stakeholders, the individuals, the organizations that actually are connected to your purpose and how much resources they can bring to your ecosystem. So it's not about just mitigating the negative impact you would have on the environment, on the society. It's about mobilizing the resources that exist in your ecosystem and that you will choose to internalize in a very intentional way. I remember we had a few years ago an examples with, in Kenya, and I had a discussion with Jean-Christophe, we'll speak later, and we were surprised actually that just by applying even very imperfectly these principles, the financial performance of the business was superior. And eventually we said we shouldn't be surprised, because when you're adding resources to your business, and you manage these resources in a way that is intentional and rigorous, you should actually not be surprised that your business performance is increasing. So here we are talking about reenacting very old natural laws. Maybe the only contribution that we make with Colin and myself is that we try to put a bit of science, a bit of discipline behind these old principles. The third element is that, of course, if finance is an important ingredient to any business venture, it's not the only one. The problem is that actually they are the only one we effectively manage. So there is a need to go beyond financial performance and develop non-financial performance metrics. And here again, performance is a critical word. We're not talking about measuring the impact that you have, right? It's about measuring the performance that you manage. How performant are you as a business to create social capital? How performant as a business you are in managing natural capital? Because all of this actually is equally important to your business than the money that you get from the bank. And you have banks for financial capital, of course. You also have banks for social capital. You have banks for natural capital, right? And these actually are important elements to consider. And after 10 years of research, we have developed this amazing insight that actually every time we invest according to these principles, not only, of course, your business becomes more responsible, but also it becomes more performant. So it is as if actually we are at a stage where, until now, we've underperformed. Are you with me? It is as if actually we were operating with a model that actually was putting a ceiling on our performance. And because actually this form of capital that actually exists in the ecosystem can be connected with our business in such a way that is almost unlimited, the growth actually and the impact on the business could also be unlimited. That's really the good news. The last point is what we call here mutual profit. Because I fundamentally believe it's our argument that actually we are talking about business here. We're not talking about doing good or to look good, right? It's about actually do good and equip ourselves and equip our companies with the tools and processes that actually allow us to align our purpose, our practice, with our modes of profit construction. Today, I like to work, my people I like to work most, maybe it will surprise you, are chief financial officers. They are the ones actually that truly can make a difference. And one of the issues is that the finance has been, for the last 50 years, primarily a compliance function, just to ensure that we follow the rules, the accounting rules, etc. It is an argument that finance could actually be an innovation function. And the modes of profit construction needs to be changed. The second issue is that because finance was so obsessed by compliance that they focused a lot of their activities on reporting performance. Right? It is my argument actually finance is about managing performance. And therefore, it's important to equip finance people with new modes of profit construction. And here, we'd like to introduce a concept which we call the mutual profit. The mutual profit is a new mode of profit construction which actually includes the negative and positive externalities that your business creates in the ecosystem in which it operates in relation with its purpose. So it's very clear that as a business we cannot solve all the problems. Okay? So we are very, very clear here when we work with our partners, and we are more than 20 projects running in the business around the world. When we deal with a business unit or the head of a retail shop, we say, well, what is your ecosystem? What is your purpose? What is your ecosystem? How many externalities can you eventually consider? And actually, there are sometimes externalities that people don't even know because they are completely unknown. I said, now we have to be very pragmatic. You only focus on the one that actually you can impact because you have the capabilities to do this, and with which you can build a reciprocal relationship. Because it's not about giving, it's about honoring a relationship. It's about giving and receiving, giving and receiving. We have a saying at Mars which says that a mutual benefit endures. And this mutuality principle is about ensuring that we have a reciprocal relationship with any party that we deal with is a critical ingredient of the economics of mutuality. And this profit actually is extremely useful. And we were very clear when we designed this profit construction that we wanted to avoid certain pitfalls. It's not a triple bottom line. It's not a set of books that speaks to finance, a set of books that speak to the trade unions, or a set of books that speaks to the NGOs. No, it's one book, right? Okay, I really believe in the power of oneness. It's also the second principle we apply, that we don't want to put financial capital above the other capital. It's not about putting money on the right of pollution. It's not putting a dollar figure on knowledge of an individual. You have to remunerate each capital according to its own kind. You remunerate financial capital with financial capital. You remunerate social capital with social capital, etc. However, there is a cost of creation and there's a cost of replacement behind this capital, and this is this cost, actually, that we take into account. And the mutual profit is a way, actually, to measure how mutual you are. If your mutual profit is above your financial profit, it means you are mutual, and actually you are investing wisely in your environment. If your financial profit is below your mutual profit, it means you are stealing something. Right? And this is actually not good for your business. And we have numerous case studies through the work we've done with Oxford and Colin that shows actually that doing good and doing well go together. And the last element, which is this point about leadership, is that it's all about incentive in the end. It's all about aligning the organization, behavior, culture with your purpose and your practice. And it is our argument that this mutual profit could actually be very quickly the ingredient by which you could align your organization and align your purpose, your practice, and your profit. And this is, in our view, the modern form of leadership, which is to seek alignment as an organization, as an individual, and to ensure that the value that you bring about at your business is also shared with the organization, and the incentive system that will promote, eventually promote equally this new equilibrium. So this is, in a nutshell, the economics of mutuality. It took us 12 years to respond to the question, what should be the right level of profit? And it's not a magic number. It is industry specific, it is business specific, it is purpose specific. But we have developed this methodology which actually now is robust. We can share it with you. I hope you will enjoy the skill shop this afternoon. And it is my great delight that after 12 years of research, of tears and blood, to some extent, we are now in a position to share the beginning of a new management theory, which is not only is going to stay at the management level, but is going to hopefully also influence the macroeconomic level and to complete the Keynesian journey. It is also maybe a sense of humor that a Frenchman and an Englishman would eventually complete the work of an Englishman. Thank you very much.